So, have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered, where did I get these eyes? Or maybe you have your father's smile. For most of human history, how these traits were passed down was a total mystery. Today, we're going to crack open that mystery by telling the story of a quiet monk who, working from his garden, solved one of biology's greatest puzzles.
I mean, it seems obvious, right? An elephant has a baby elephant. But really think about it. Why? What is the invisible instruction manual that makes sure life follows these rules, generation after generation? This was one of the biggest unanswered questions in science for centuries.
And then you have the flip side. What about all the little variations? Why do you and your sibling look alike in some ways, but are totally different in others? These questions about what stays the same and what changes are really the heart of genetics, the science of how life's code is passed on.
For the longest time, the whole idea of heredity was just one giant puzzle. People knew that like produces like, but the actual scientific rules behind it, nobody had a clue.
What's amazing is that for thousands of years, we humans were basically acting like geneticists without knowing it. We were selectively breeding animals, like creating the Sahiwal cows in Punjab from wilder ancestors, or picking the best crops to plant next year. We were playing the game and getting really good at it, but we had no idea what the rules were.
And this is where our story's hero comes in. We go to the mid-19th century, not to some fancy lab, but to a quiet monastery garden. His name was Gregor Mendel, and he was about to turn the world of biology upside down.
Just look at this timeline. He started his work in 1856. For 7 straight years, until 1863, Mendel was out there, carefully crossbreeding thousands and thousands of pea plants. This was way more than just a bit of gardening. It was a huge, systematic investigation that would eventually lead him to the basic laws of inheritance.
Now, part of Mendel's genius was choosing the perfect subject to study, the humble pea plant. It was ideal. It had really clear, distinct traits. A plant was either tall or it was dwarf. There was no confusing in between. He could also completely control who pollinated whom. But you know what his real secret weapon was? He used math. He started counting and looking for statistical patterns, which was a totally revolutionary thing to do in biology at the time.
So, how did he actually crack the code? Well, let's walk through one of his most famous experiments, called the monohybrid cross. It's simpler than it sounds.
Okay, so here's what he did. First, he took a purebred tall plant and crossed it with a purebred dwarf plant. And the first generation of offspring, they were all tall. It was like the dwarf trait had just vanished into thin air. But then, and this is the brilliant part, he let those tall plants pollinate themselves. And in the next generation, poof, the dwarf trait was back.
And here it is, the big breakthrough. That reappearance wasn't random at all. He counted them, and he found a stunningly precise pattern. For every 3 tall plants, there was 1 dwarf plant, a perfect 3-to-1 ratio. This wasn't just biology anymore. This was math. This was the clue that blew the whole case wide open.
This predictable ratio gave Mendel a radical idea. He figured that some kind of discrete factors were being passed down from the parents. And crucially, these factors didn't blend together like paint. They were passed on whole. Today, we call these factors by a different name, genes, the basic units of heredity.
And he realized these genes came in different versions, which we now call alleles. So in his pea plants, the allele for tallness was dominant. That means if it was there, you were going to see it. The allele for dwarfness was recessive. It was still hanging around, but it was being hidden, or masked, by the dominant one.
And this gets to a really critical difference. You've got the genotype. That's the actual genetic recipe an organism has. And then you've got the phenotype. That's the physical trait you can actually see. Think of it like a recipe versus the cake you bake. This is why one of those first-generation plants could look tall, its phenotype, while secretly carrying the recipe for being dwarf in its genotype.
We can actually see exactly how this works with a simple tool called a Punnett square. It's just a little grid that helps us map out all the possible combinations of alleles from each parent. It lets us predict what's going to happen.
So when you fill out the square for that second-generation cross, what do you get? It perfectly predicts the 3-to-1 ratio of what the plants will look like, the phenotype. You've got 75% tall plants and 25% dwarf plants, exactly what Mendel was seeing out there in his garden.
But here's the hidden secret the Punnett square reveals. Underneath that 3-to-1 physical ratio, there's a different genetic ratio, 1 to 2 to 1. 1 part pure tall, 2 parts hybrid tall, and 1 part pure dwarf. This is the mechanism. This explains how a trait can hide out in one generation, carried by a hybrid, only to show up again in the next one.
So, from thousands upon thousands of these careful experiments and observations, Mendel was able to lay down the fundamental rules of the game, the laws that govern all of heredity.
And it really boils down to two main laws. First, the law of dominance, which says traits don't blend. One can completely mask another. And second, the law of segregation. This just means that even though a parent has 2 copies, or alleles, for a trait, they only pass one of those copies on to their offspring. It's all a game of chance.
Now, here's the crazy part. Mendel's incredible discovery was pretty much ignored for more than 30 years, but when science finally caught up, his work became the absolute foundation of modern genetics, taking us from his humble pea plants all the way to understanding ourselves.
Of course, Mendel gave us the essential rulebook. But as scientists kept exploring, they found that genetics can get even more complex and interesting. They started discovering patterns of inheritance that went beyond simple dominance.
A great example is our own ABO blood types. Here, the alleles for A-type blood and B-type blood are codominant. It's not a case of one winning over the other. If you get both, they both show up, and you get AB blood type. It's a fantastic example of how those basic rules can have all these cool variations.
You really have to appreciate how revolutionary Mendel's thinking was. This quote says it all. Using math to explain biology was just not done. It was a totally new and, to many people back then, unacceptable idea. But that logical, numbers-based approach was exactly what he needed to find the elegant, predictable order hidden inside the beautiful mess of life.
So what's the big takeaway here? Those simple, elegant rules, first discovered in a monastery garden, gave us the key to unlock the code of life itself. But now we're moving beyond just reading that code. We're starting to learn how to rewrite it. And that leaves us with a huge question. It's no longer just about how life is written, but how we will choose to edit it.